Hello, welcome to another episode of Beyond the Words, podcast all about career paths and multilingual communication. Our guest today is Neela Mistry-Bradshaw. Neela has had a 25-year career building marketing teams in the B2B tech sector, and earlier this year she founded Align to help businesses close the gap between marketing and sales. So welcome, Neela. Very glad to have you. Could you, just to start, could you tell us a little bit about this disconnect between marketing and sales? What causes these gaps, and how do you drive alignment between them?
Sure. I started Align because this disconnect between marketing and sales was a real bugbear of mine. For many years, I've worked in small companies, and then when I got into the larger ones, the problem seemed to be even bigger. Traditionally, marketing and sales were quite siloed, and they still are to a certain extent. They have different priorities, different metrics and timescales. And, marketing's focused on generating brand awareness and demand, whilst sales are under pressure to chase that short-term revenue and target every quarter. And when these teams work in silos, that creates that misalignment, and that misalignment's on the messaging, the lead quality, the attribution, the timing. With alignment, it's really important to have that alignment right from the onset, and that's all about getting everybody in one room, talking to one another, getting in there with marketing. Marketing is always left out of that planning process. And if you can get marketing, sales in a room with your partners, I've worked a lot with partners, getting all three in a room and other stakeholders that have a vested interest in, driving that pipeline, that target number, then you're going to get a better result, a better outcome. So my business is all about helping these guys get a seat at the table, talking to one another, starting with that revenue goal in mind, building out that pipeline waterfall, and then building out your joint go-to-market campaigns and sales plays around those shared plays. So for example, depending on what product, service, or solution you're selling, you might want to have a cross-sell, upsell motion, or you might be going after net new business. But making sure you're aligned on the ideal customers, profiles that you're going after, the accounts that you're going after, and then making sure everything's aligned through that end-to-end process, from the data to the campaigns, the messaging, the tone of voice, the branding, all that, and having those sort of shared 2 minutes. Having those shared revenue goals helps to focus on the outcome. It also helps you to make alignment more operational. You have regular communication, collaboration. You can have shared ownership and accountability. At the end of the day, it's one target, that you're all trying to hit, but having those joint go-to-market motions and that alignment and those metrics will help you achieve that quicker.
Cool. That's I love the getting them to sit at the same table, talk to each other, share, joint, etc. It sounds like marriage counseling at corporate level, doesn't it?
Yeah, it really is. And I've been in those situations where I can see the disconnect. Sales does their own thing, marketing does their own. They just need to bash their heads together.
Yeah.
Because they're going off at tangents. If they actually sat down at a table together and planned, they'd understand one another rather than blame each other.
Exactly, the finger pointing. And have you ever heard the expression "the coloring in department" when the sales talks about marketing?
Yeah, definitely. I think they think we're all about swag. I think that's the common misconstruct, really. Marketing, sales normally comes to marketing if they want swag.
Yeah, yeah, totally. Yeah. Now talking about disconnect, what I'm interested in as well, because it's all great, when you talk about that global level, but what sort of gaps do you find between global and regional levels, and how do you align the goals of global HQ with the realities of a local field marketing?
Yeah, it's a real common gap that it's a real challenge when you've got a really large or matrix organization and you've got a global operation and you've got lots of regional sort of I guess operations. You've got field at the regional and country level, and it's normally global level that drives that strategy and messaging from a real sort of central view. Often, the companies I've worked with have often been in North America. So, it is a challenge for them to understand the different cultures and the way people do business across the globe. Local teams are a lot closer to their customer. They understand the market, what they need. But I think the gap really arises when global teams don't translate some of their campaigns well. They don't really understand that local nuance. And they're, literally or contextually not good at translating those campaigns to that local level. It's a difficult one because they've got to get that tone right. They've got to get the timing and the relevance of that campaign or sales play right. And I think the way to overcome that is to fix by building the alignment piece both ways. Global needs to talk to the field at the regional or local level, and they need to speak to global. So I think one of the things that I would really recommend is sitting down, talking about what those nuances and differences are, and co-creating with the field teams early, plan together. That comes back to what I said earlier about alignment, aligning, planning, understand each other, what you actually need. An important part of that is to set up some structured feedback loops, so content and campaigns can flex to the local relevance, adapting messaging and offers, and share what's working, share what's not working. Global needs to support the local field marketing sellers, partners, because they know what their local businesses need. They know how to go after those customers, and it might not be an email campaign. It might be more of a relationship thing. It might be an event that pulls in more crowds and gets that message across. But when you start empowering the field marketers, when you start building trust in them, the execution becomes more effective, and that trust across the business really empowers those field marketers. So I would say, trust equals better execution and stronger focus on hitting that revenue target across the regions. And it's great when everybody aligns: global, local, marketing, sales, alliances, partners. That's a recipe for success.
Going back to a bit you mentioned, sorry, just one second. Please take a pause. Going back to what you were saying a bit about translation, and that it's a process that sometimes global doesn't always understand. What is sort of your experience with that in terms of like the importance of good localized content for alignment between marketing and sales, and the consequences of poorly localized marketing content?
Yeah, I think you've got to have good localization, and you've got to understand what that means. And it's not just about translating words. And I think I was chatting to, I think it was Bruno earlier, about, words, certain words, like in French, you can't translate cloud literally. That would just be completely wrong. Nuage is the word, but it doesn't make sense in the technology industry. So it's not just about translation, it's about contextualizing that message to fit that local market, the local industry nuances, the cultural tone, the consistency with the brand. And I think one of the things that I've found getting local the local markets to translate or get that consistency is really to use one agency that has that works with partners in those regions or has the know-how and the knowledge and people on the ground to translate in real context. And one of the things that would be really helpful is to build that glossary of terms that are relevant for your industry. So it's, you know, great localization means that it sort of speaks to content that really resonates with customer realities at the end of the day. So when marketing creates that content, you know, it needs to resonate with the field, the sales, and sales is more likely to use that. You know, we see lots of examples where, you know, marketing generates content, it's localized, but it's not really hitting the mark. And I think, you know, some of this content then ends up being created by sales. They DIY it. They waste their time. They should be focusing their efforts on selling. And the messaging, it becomes inconsistent. The brand gets diluted. So I think the solution really is to plan together, you know, do that content planning together, co-create, and get input from your, you know, your stakeholders, you know, the people on the ground, the marketeers, even the sales folk and your partners, because they know, you know, they know what content lands. And, you know, it's got to be content that's produced. It's got to be content that actually supports pipeline development at that regional level. So if it's more relevant, it gets used, it drives adoption. And, you know, and I think, as I keep saying, alignment is key, you know, even with content generation.
Absolutely. Amen.
It really is. But, do you know, it's an interesting one, because you don't marketing just wants to get the content out there. They just want to get their campaigns out there. But I think, you know, that whole planning piece that I spoke about, that alignment right from the start, you know, making sure your campaigns are aligned with sales, you're using you're targeting the same contacts, you're using the same data. You've got that data governance in place to enable that. That really helps to, you know, drive that success. And a lot of companies I know still don't do it, even the big ones. You know, it's easier to do that in smaller companies, I think.
Probably is. You're right. Yeah, totally. Well, any sort of business related podcast wouldn't be complete without talking about the elephant in the room, AI. On your website, on Align's website, you mentioning when mentioning Align's process, you note that you, and I quote, apply AI and automation to scale their effort and accelerate success, but only after establishing foundational alignment. So why is that foundational alignment important? And two, do you find that there's a lot of pushback from your clients as well, saying, yeah, alignment is great, but you know, let's do AI because there seems to be a rush to AI at the moment?
Yeah, great question. And also, I'm so glad you read some of my content. You sort of worry if anybody's actually reading it. You spend a lot of time and effort writing it, and I'm trying to write from experience as well. So I think there's a lot of companies that have this urgency around AI. Oh, we got to get AI in, we've got to do this, we've got to do that. And especially those leaders that are under pressure to sort of move faster, you know, reduce costs, produce results instantly, and they think AI is like, you know, the golden nugget, the golden bullet. But my view is quite clear on this, and I think AI should really be used to amplify what's already working, and it shouldn't really compensate for any gaps in process or strategy or team alignment. It is powerful. AI is powerful. I use it every day, but I think from a go-to-market perspective, that alignment needs to happen first. You've got to have a foundation in place first, because if you start applying automation and AI to broken processes, you just simply scale that dysfunction and that chaos. So what I tend to say to my clients or people that, you know, chat to me about AI is first establish the foundations and align on goals, define your workflows, your processes, you know, build that clear data governance, make sure your tech stack is working on the MarTech and sales stack side. and then look at ways you can introduce AI. Already, you've got tools. Some marketing automation platforms already have AI built in. Same with some CRM tools that really accelerate, and help you sort of get to the end result quicker. But I think when it's done right, it can be incredibly powerful, and it actually accelerates what already works. And I think it's great for things like, campaign optimization, content personalization, and, partner enablement at scale. I think the thing is that the channel, you've got to channel that urgency into readiness and get those foundations right first. And so when you do invest in AI, it actually drives real impact rather than chaos. So what I would say is look at what you've got already. Does your foundational technology, processes, communication, collaboration, does that actually work? If not, fix the broken parts and then see where you can use AI. But I do actually use it. I use several different AIs to write content, but I think we'll go on and talk about that human element in that. But I think that foundational part is really key.
Yeah.
Yeah, regarding the sort of human element and the content communication part of it, going back to your content again, you said recently in a blog post, AI certainly has the potential to enhance efficiency, enable better decision-making, and streamline processes. However, it cannot replace the crucial human elements of strategic thinking, genuine collaboration, and clear communication. So how have you found it hinders things like collaboration and clear communication? How do you advise your clients who want to use it for content creation and for comms? Like, what are the pros and cons, the benefits and the pitfalls?
Yeah, so my view is quite clear on this. I think firstly, collaboration, it's not just about sharing files and getting AI to do manual tasks that you do with a human, sort of in a human context. The collaboration piece is quite key because you've got to talk to your people, you've got to talk to your teams, you've got to align that intent and and get that trust and get that debate and decision making flowing. You can't just rely on AI tools to help you do that. I think AI is I'd call it a brilliant enabler, because it is, but it can't really replace or replicate that nuance of human judgment, or the trust that comes from building those relationships with your teams, your colleagues, your partners, and that authentic communication that comes along with that. I think if you're relying too heavily on AI, especially when you're generating content, without that human layer, you really risk, I think, losing the context and the relevance. You lose that tone and connection. You lose your personality. Yeah. Because if you think about it, all the AI tools, they're pulling from large language models. They're being trained, some with the same information. If you start relying too heavily on it, then everything starts looking and sounding the same, and you're losing potentially your personality and your brand tone within that. I think overusing AI, that causes that generic sort of off-tone messaging. But I think the best use of AI is use it really cleverly. I think you need to use it as a almost like a buddy. I use it as a buddy. I have my ideas, I've got my experience. I use it. I use that to create drafts first, shape the stories, shape the content, and then I get AI to refine it, or make it sound a little bit more polished. So I think the benefits of AI are huge. It enhances productivity, definitely. It's really helped me. It can also slow down productivity, I think, especially if you're a bit like me and you're reiterating, you're going back, you're changing stuff, to make it more realistic. I always think use AI, but use yourself, use your brain at the same time. It's great for speed, scaling, surfacing insight. It's great for research. It's great for, brainstorming. I use it as a brainstorming buddy. But I think the human element, us humans, we shape the message. We can sense check the accuracy. We can, check the context, make sure that the content is actually speaking to the audience. It's not just verbiage. A lot of people use AI, create stuff, stick it on LinkedIn, and it just sounds the same. There's no personality within that. And I think that really helps to lose your voice if you go down that route too much. And I think it impacts on your credibility. And, it also impacts on the relevance of what the message you're trying to get across. So I think, the key to this is where AI fits in the workflow, is really important. And that human input to personalize and add value and context and experience is really essential for impact.
Yeah. I think there will definitely be a backlash with AI of overuse as well. And as you said, everything sounding the same and everything. And then people would be already are craving more personality, more, that human touch. And I think that'll be another sort of differentiation factor for brands as well, to keep that human element, to keep that personality in a flow of sameness.
You see that a lot in if you look at the videos. If you start watching videos, or if you see artwork, that traditionally a creative designer would have created, you can tell when it's been created by AI. There's this certain style that I've noticed cropping up. It's not authentic. It doesn't look good. It really damages your brand. I think you've got to be really you've either got to get really excellent at training and using AI and making sure that it's aligning with your brand and it's consistent and it has your tone of voice and style. If you don't, again, it's all going to become a bit samey, like written content. So, it's quite concerning, really, because a lot of companies are now, laying off staff. You're losing creative teams and marketeers that are quite accomplished writers or creators. And, I think that AI is great. As I said earlier, it's a great enabler and it can really help to accelerate outcomes. But I think, it shouldn't be to the detriment of, people's jobs and that human factor.
Yeah. And when that backlash comes in, it might be too late, though, because those people, will have moved on and done something else because they don't want to be part of that. Only the future will tell anyway. Now, time to move on to our last question. Question we ask all our guests at the end of the day. We are a sort of language-related podcast. And I would be really interested to know, well, first of all, what languages do you speak apart from English?
Okay, so I studied French at school and at university, and I worked abroad using that French. I actually also studied Spanish at night school. So when I worked as an international market analyst many years ago, I could cover the South American studies, the copper and fiber, cable and component, structured wiring studies. Really sexy, not? So I did manage to interview in Chile, Argentina, in those languages, 3-hour sort of interviews with, channel manufacturers, distributors and system integrators. But anyway, and at home, I was brought up speaking Gujarati. So I can speak Gujarati, but I come from a family where both my parents speak 5 or 6 languages because, my father was born in India and my mother, although she's Indian, she was born in Uganda and had to learn lots of different languages, including Swahili, which, but we learnt a few words when we were younger, of course, all the rude words. I could string a sentence together now.
Now, in that case, if you were to emulate your parents and, learn a language that you've never touched before, even in just swear words, which language would it be and why?
I'm going to go off-piste a little bit here. I'm going to choose sign language because I think that's a universal language of the world, and hopefully it works. English Sign Language works with, I don't know, French Sign Language, or I don't know, another. I can't even think of another. Swahili.
Yeah, but I love the idea.
Sign language. I don't know, but I think I'd use that. It's a bit different to saying I do want to learn Italian, and I find that language quite warm and sexy, isn't it? But
just keep Italian to listen to.
yeah. I actually like listening to the French-speaking English. I think that's why I went off and did French at university, so I could go and live and work there and listen to them trying to speak to me in English with a French accent.
I see.
Which was always really lovely.
All right, we'll have sign language. That is good. I like that, because our last guest as well went for an ancient language, or several ancient languages. So normally we have people who are talking about like modern languages, and our previous guest went for a different type of approach. So there you go. Now we've got sign language. So we're complete. Well, thank you very much, Neela. Thank you for all your insights as well. They're really, really interesting and fascinating, and it really tallies up as well with what we see in the language industry. The risk of a disconnect, the risk of creating bland content with AI and all that. And it's been great having you on the show.
Thank you very much. It's been quite eye-opening. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thanks, Neela.